Hello, everyone. My name is Kara Pierce. I'm 35 years old, and the moment I realized my family had never truly loved me was not during a fight, or a betrayal, or a screaming match. It was on my wedding day, standing alone in a white dress, when three empty seats in the front row told me everything I had spent a lifetime refusing to accept. Here's the twist most people don't expect. That same family, who couldn't spare a single hour to attend my wedding, would later show up at my door demanding millions. And by the time they did, it was already too late for apologies, excuses, or guilt. And here's the part they never saw coming. Their years of silence didn't make me weaker. It made me unstoppable. Before I tell you how it all unfolded, and how their own choices ultimately collapsed the image they worked so hard to protect, take a second to like this story, subscribe if you're new here, and let me know in the comments if you've ever felt invisible to the people who were supposed to see you most. Sometimes, silence says more than cruelty ever could. Now let me take you back to where this story began. The bridal suite at a vineyard in Willamette Valley, Oregon was impossibly quiet. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears until your own breathing feels too loud. I stood in front of the full-length mirror, hands resting lightly against the silk of my wedding dress. Every detail was perfect. The tailor had adjusted it twice. The makeup artist had somehow made my eyes look brighter, steadier, like someone who belonged at the center of the room. On the vanity beside me, a bouquet of white roses waited patiently, stems wrapped in ivory ribbon. I checked my phone again. Nothing. No message from my mother, Marilyn Pierce. No missed call from my father, Howard Pierce. Not even a courtesy text from my older brother, Logan. 14 times in 20 minutes I checked. Same result every time. A soft knock came at the door. Kara? The wedding planner, Martha, leaned in, her professional smile just a fraction too careful. It's time. Are you ready? I turned toward the window that overlooked the ceremony space. 90 guests sat in neat rows of white chairs. Sunlight filtered through the vines. A string quartet played something gentle and hopeful. And in the very front row, 3 seats were unmistakably empty. They're not coming, are they? I asked, hating how my voice trembled. Martha hesitated. There's still time, she said. We both knew there wasn't. 3 days earlier, my mother's voice had sounded almost bored over the phone. We'll try, sweetie, she'd said. Logan's firm has an event that weekend. I remembered gripping the edge of my kitchen counter, forcing myself to stay calm. I can pay for the flights, the hotel, anything. Please, Mom. In the background, I'd heard my father murmur, not quietly enough. Tell her we're busy. Busy. As if my wedding were an inconvenience. Standing there now, I smoothed the fabric of my dress and took a slow breath. In, out, I whispered to myself. I'm ready, I told Martha. The doors opened and 90 heads turned as I began walking down the aisle. Alone. I felt the sympathy before I saw it. Soft expressions, gentle smiles, the kind people offer when they don't know what to say. Each step forward felt heavier than the last, memories pressing in uninvited. I was 8 years old again, standing in our living room while my parents adjusted the placement of Logan's debate trophy on the mantel. They stepped back, admired it, took photos to send to relatives. My art contest certificate sat folded inside a kitchen drawer. When I'd shown it to my mother earlier that day, she'd glanced at it briefly. That's nice, honey, she said, turning back to the stove. Later, my father ruffled my hair. Logan needs more support, he'd explained. He's going places. You understand, right, Kara? And my mother, never missing a chance to sharpen the message. Why can't you be more like your brother? He focuses on what matters. So I tried. I collected academic awards, scholarships, built a career from the ground up, each achievement another quiet attempt to be seen, each one met with polite acknowledgement, or none at all. At the altar, Ethan waited for me. His eyes didn't flick to the empty seats. They stayed on me, steady and certain. When I reached him, he took my hands, warm and grounding. I'm here, he whispered. we're enough. For the first time that day, my chest loosened. The ceremony unfolded around us. I spoke my vows clearly, my voice gaining strength with every word. I choose a future where we see each other fully, I said, and I meant more than just marriage. When we were pronounced husband and wife, Ethan's mother pulled me into an embrace that felt instinctive, real. "You're one of us now," she whispered. At the reception, laughter filled the air. Ethan twirled me beneath string lights. His cousins joined the dance floor, friends toasted loudly. For moments at a time, I almost forgot. Almost. Later, I slipped away to check my phone one last time. Still nothing. Ethan found me staring at the blank screen. "They missed something beautiful today," he said gently. I set the phone face down. "Their choice," I replied, surprising myself with how light my voice sounded. "Not my burden." At the time, I didn't fully believe it, but 2 years later, everything would change, and the family who couldn't show up for me would finally realize what silence truly costs. The days after the wedding unfolded gently, almost cautiously, like life was giving me space to breathe. Ethan and I moved into a sunlit townhouse just outside Portland, the kind of place with creaky stairs and imperfect window frames that caught the afternoon light in soft, forgiving angles. It wasn't grand, it wasn't impressive, but it was ours. And for the first time, I wasn't building a life while secretly waiting for someone else's approval to arrive. Ethan's family filled the silence my own had left behind, without ever pointing to it. His mother texted me recipes and asked if I preferred rosemary or thyme. His father insisted on helping us hang shelves, even when Ethan could have done it himself. His cousins invited us to game nights and birthdays, and no one once made me feel like I had to earn my place at the table. They didn't gush. They didn't overcompensate. They simply included me. And that, I learned, was its own kind of love. On Sunday mornings, Ethan and I walked to a small cafe downtown, sharing a single newspaper between us. He asked about my work, really asked, and listened in a way that didn't feel transactional. When I talked about ideas, about plans, about dreams I'd kept tucked away for years, he didn't interrupt or redirect, he leaned in. At night, when the city quieted, we talked about everything and nothing. Childhood memories, fears we didn't like admitting out loud, the strange relief of realizing we no longer had to prove anything to anyone else. Still, the absence lingered. It crept in during unexpected moments. When I folded thank you cards and realized I hadn't sent any to my parents because there had been nothing to thank them for. When I framed a wedding photo and hesitated, unsure whether to include the empty front row in the shot, I told myself I was fine. And mostly, I was. But grief doesn't always announce itself as sadness. Sometimes it shows up as a quiet ache, a space where something should have been. 2 weeks after the wedding, Ethan found me sitting on the floor of our living room, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes. I was holding an old photo album, its spine cracked from years of neglect. Inside were pictures from birthdays I barely remembered. School plays where I stood slightly off-center. A college graduation photo where Logan stood between my parents, their hands resting proudly on his shoulders, while I smiled from the edge of the frame. Ethan sat beside me without asking questions. "They didn't come," I said eventually, my voice steady but distant. "And I keep waiting for it to hit me harder," he nodded. "Sometimes it doesn't hit all at once." That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations I'd had 1,000 times in my head. Different versions where I said the right thing, where they finally understood, where they showed up, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to. Instead, weeks turned into months. There were no calls, no explanations, no awkward attempts to reconnect. Life went on, quietly and efficiently without me. I poured myself into work. Luminarch Studios had started as a scrappy idea years earlier. Me, a borrowed laptop, and a determination I hadn't fully understood at the time. Now, It was growing faster than I'd anticipated. New clients, bigger contracts, conversations with investors who saw potential where others once saw a hobby. I worked late, not because I had to, but because it felt grounding. Every milestone was earned, every decision mine. Ethan never complained. He brought me dinner when I forgot to eat. He reminded me to sleep when my eyes burned from staring at screens too long. "You don't have to carry everything alone anymore," he said once gently. I wanted to believe him, but some habits are hard to unlearn. When the first acquisition discussion surfaced, casual at first, almost hypothetical, I didn't tell my parents. Not because I was hiding it, because the thought simply never occurred to me. They weren't part of that world. They hadn't been for a long time. Still, on my birthday I checked my phone. A single text arrived hours later. "Happy birthday, Kara." No emoji, no photo, no follow-up. I stared at it longer than I should have, then set the phone down. That night, Ethan and I celebrated with friends instead. Laughter filled the room. Someone brought a cake shaped like a film reel, an inside joke from my early days at Luminark. I blew out the candles surrounded by people who knew my story. Not the polished version, but the real one. And yet, when the party ended and the house grew quiet, I felt it again. That hollow space. It wasn't longing anymore, it was something closer to reckoning. I began therapy a few months later. Not because I was falling apart, but because I was tired of carrying questions without answers. Sitting across from Patricia Wells, I said things I'd never fully articulated before. "They always treated Logan like he needed saving," I said once, "and me like I didn't need anything at all." Patricia nodded. "Sometimes independence is assigned, not chosen." That sentence stayed with me, because it explained everything. My parents hadn't ignored me because I lacked value. They'd done it because they believed I could survive without them. And in a strange way, they'd been right. By the end of that first year of marriage, my life looked full, purposeful, solid. But the truth was simpler and harder to admit. I wasn't waiting for my family anymore. I was moving forward without them. And somewhere deep down, I knew that if they ever came back into my life, it wouldn't be because they finally saw me. It would be because I had something they needed. I just didn't know yet how far they'd be willing to go to take it. By the second year of my marriage, Luminark Studios no longer felt like a fragile thing I needed to shield from the world. It felt inevitable. What had once been a handful of contracts and long nights hunched over a borrowed laptop had evolved into a lean, focused company with a clear identity. We weren't flashy. We didn't chase trends. We built things carefully. Visual narratives that helped brands explain who they were without shouting. And people noticed. The first serious acquisition conversation came quietly, the way real opportunities often do, a call after hours, a hypothetical question framed as curiosity. A request for financials that was just specific enough to make my pulse jump. I didn't celebrate. I didn't announce it. I kept working. Years of being overlooked had trained me not to trust attention too quickly. When negotiations intensified, my team grew. We moved into a glass-walled office downtown, sunlight spilling across polished concrete floors. I hired people who believed in the work, not just the exit. People who challenged me, argued with me, and stayed late because they cared. On the day we finalized the acquisition, just over $21 million, after 2 years of discussion and 5 years of building, I sat alone in my office for a long moment after everyone else left. Not because I was overwhelmed, because I was calm. This wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge. It was validation earned inch by inch, decision by decision. That evening, my team surprised me with champagne and cheap plastic flutes. Jen Morales, my creative director, raised her glass with a grin. "To Kara," she said, "for building something from nothing while certain people weren't looking." The room erupted in laughter and applause. I smiled, clinked glasses, thanked them all. I meant every word. Then my phone buzzed. Not a call, not a message, a notification. Logan had posted on Instagram. I shouldn't have opened it. I did anyway. There they were, My parents flanking Logan and his wife, Hannah, their identical daughters standing proudly in matching school uniforms. Everyone looked polished, happy, complete. The caption read, "Family tradition continues. Third generation at Westridge Academy." I scrolled. A family vacation in Maui. Smiling faces, pristine beaches, a holiday gathering I hadn't been invited to. My father's retirement dinner, complete with speeches and toasts. In every photo, the same thing stood out. There was no space where I should have been. What struck me wasn't jealousy. It was arithmetic. Private school tuition at Westridge Academy ran close to $30,000 a year, per child. The Maui rental alone would have cost more than most people's annual rent. Logan's house, visible in the background of several photos, sat in a neighborhood where nothing sold for under $2 million. Logan's law firm was respectable, comfortable. It wasn't that comfortable. "Kara?" Jen touched my arm gently. "You okay?" I locked my phone screen. "Just checking messages." The celebration continued, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't hurt anymore. I was observant. Later that night, after the office emptied, I sat at my desk and did something I hadn't done in years. I looked at my parents' social media. Post after post chronicled Logan's life in meticulous detail. His promotions, his children's milestones, family gatherings framed like magazine spreads. My presence was almost non-existent. One birthday post from the year before, no photo, just a line. "Happy birthday, Kara." That was it. I closed my laptop and leaned back in my chair. I finally understood what had been bothering me. Not just the silence, but the selective attention. My parents weren't indifferent. They were intentional. They knew how to show pride. They just chose where to place it. The realization settled quietly, without drama, like a door closing on its own. The next morning I called my financial advisor. "I want to make a purchase," I said, my voice steady. "Today." 3 hours later, I was signing paperwork for a metallic gray Porsche Taycan. It wasn't practical. It wasn't necessary. It was mine. I drove it home slowly, the hum of the engine grounding me in the present. In my driveway, sunlight caught the metallic finish just right. I took one photo, no filters, no captions explaining anything. I posted it with 2 words, "Dreams realized." Then I went inside and made dinner with my husband. For 3 days, nothing happened. No calls, no messages, no reaction at all. And then, on Wednesday afternoon, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in nearly 5 years. Mom calling. My stomach tightened, not with fear, but with clarity. I answered. "Hello?" "Kara," my mother said, her voice carrying that familiar mix of urgency and authority. "We need to talk. There's a family meeting tomorrow." A family meeting. After years of silence. After missing my wedding. After ignoring my work. After overlooking my existence. Now suddenly, it was urgent. "What's important?" I asked calmly. She hesitated. I heard my father's voice in the background. "Tell her it's important." "Financial issues," she said finally. "We need to discuss it as a family." I looked at the Porsche key resting on my kitchen counter. Of course they had seen the photo. "Tomorrow at 2, I replied, ending the call before she could say anything else. As I set the phone down, Ethan looked up from the sink. "Family?" he asked. I nodded. "They're reaching out because they saw what I have," I said quietly. "Not because they finally see me." Ethan dried his hands and came to stand beside me. "Then you get to decide what happens next." For the first time, I realized how true that was. My success no longer made me invisible, it made me necessary. And that, I knew, would change everything. The drive to my parents' house took 40 minutes. 40 minutes of familiar roads I hadn't traveled in years, each mile pulling memories to the surface whether I invited them or not. I drove the Porsche Taycan carefully, hands steady on the wheel, the quiet hum of the engine a sharp contrast to the noise in my head. This wasn't nerves. It was awareness. The last time I'd stood on that porch in Lake Oswego, I'd been standing beside Ethan, my engagement ring still new on my hand. My mother had nodded politely. My father had checked his watch twice. They'd congratulated me the way people congratulate a distant colleague, pleasant, detached, already thinking about what came next. I hadn't been back since. At a red light, my phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. "Remember who you are. Call me if you need extraction." I smiled despite myself. Another notification followed, this one from Naomi Keller, the investor who had believed in Luminarch Studios when it was little more than a pitch deck and stubborn optimism. "Your worth isn't measured by people who couldn't see it. Whatever happens, don't forget that." I exhaled slowly, letting the words settle. When the light turned green, I drove on. My parents' house appeared exactly as I remembered it. White colonial, manicured hedges, circular driveway designed to impress without saying so outright. Everything about it projected stability, respectability, control. I parked the Porsche at the edge of the drive, its sleek lines looking almost defiant against the traditional facade. For a moment, I stayed in the car. Not because I was afraid to go in, but because I understood something I hadn't before. They had never needed me. Until now. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my assistant, confirming tomorrow's production review, and reminding me of the afternoon meeting I couldn't afford to miss. Life, steady and moving forward, completely unconcerned with whatever drama waited behind that front door. I stepped out of the car and straightened my jacket. Before I could knock, the door swung open. My mother, Marilyn, stood there, her expression shifting quickly, from irritation to surprise, as her eyes flicked past me to the driveway. My father, Howard, appeared beside her, his gaze lingering on the Porsche just a second too long. "Well," he said finally, "you've done well for yourself." Not hello, not we missed you, just an assessment. "Yes," I replied evenly. They stepped aside to let me in. No hugs, no warmth, just polite efficiency. Inside, nothing had changed. The same polished hardwood floors, the same framed photos lining the hallway, Logan's law school graduation, Logan's wedding, Logan's children. No wedding photo of mine. They led me to the dining room, where Logan and Hannah were already seated. Logan looked up and nodded, as if we'd spoken last week instead of 5 years ago. "Kara," he said. I didn't sit. Howard cleared his throat and reached for a leather folder stacked neatly at the center of the table. "Let's get straight to business." "No," I said calmly. "First, I'd like to know why I'm suddenly important enough to be included in family discussions." The room stilled. Marilyn exchanged a glance with Howard. Logan shifted in his chair. "We can talk about that later," my mother said, slipping into the familiar dismissive tone I knew too well. "There are more pressing matters." "I'm not in a rush," I replied, remaining standing. "And I'm not interested in being convenient only when it suits you." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across my father's face. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Howard slid a document across the table toward me. "Logan's mortgage is 3 months behind," he said. "The twins' school tuition hasn't been paid for this semester." I said nothing. "You need to help your brother," Marilyn added, her voice softening just enough to sound reasonable. "Think about your nieces, they're just children." Logan leaned forward, his jaw tight. "We're family. When one of us succeeds, we help the others." Hannah opened a leather photo album and pushed it toward me. Inside were pictures of children I barely recognized, birthday parties, school events, moments I hadn't been invited to witness. "They ask about you," she said quietly. "Maddie wants to know why you never visit." I closed the album and slid it back. "Where were you at my wedding?" I asked. The question landed without accusation, without heat, just fact. Logan blinked. "What?" "My wedding, 2 years ago." I met each of their eyes in turn. "Where were you?" Marilyn's hand fluttered to her throat. "We were busy. Logan had an event." "It wasn't convenient," Howard added, as if explaining a missed dinner reservation. Something inside me settled. I nodded slowly. And yet, here you are now. Logan's face flushed. That's not fair. Isn't it? I said quietly. You only called because you saw the car. No one denied it. Howard pushed the paperwork closer. We're only asking for what's reasonable. Family helps family. I looked at the documents, then back at them. For the first time in my adult life, I saw the truth with perfect clarity. They didn't want reconciliation. They wanted access. And this meeting wasn't about love. It was about money. I straightened, finally taking a seat, not in submission, but in control. Tell me, I said evenly, folding my hands on the table, why should I write that check today? The answer, I knew, would decide everything. No one answered me right away. The silence in my parents' dining room felt deliberate, like a tactic. My father, Howard, sat at the head of the table, hands folded as if presiding over a board meeting rather than a family reckoning. Marilyn perched beside him, posture perfect despite the tightness around her mouth. Across from me, Logan slouched in his chair, jaw clenched, while Hannah kept her eyes lowered, fingers resting on the edge of the photo album she'd already tried to use as leverage. Finally, Howard cleared his throat. We've done everything we could, he said. Our retirement fund is strained. The word landed heavy. Strained meant depleted. Years of quiet support, years of propping up appearances, finally catching up with them. And, I asked? Marilyn leaned forward, her voice softening into the tone she'd always used when she wanted compliance. You're successful, Kara. You've always been independent. This won't hurt you the way it would hurt us. There it was. Not can you help, but you can afford to. Logan scoffed. You act like we're asking for charity. This is temporary. A bridge. A bridge to what? I asked calmly. To stability, he snapped. You wouldn't understand. Some of us didn't get lucky. I didn't flinch. Luck didn't build my company. Howard's eyes narrowed. What does any of that have to do with the current situation? Everything. I folded my hands on the table, mirroring his posture. Years ago, I would have shrunk under that look. Today, I held it. You want me to write a check, I continued, but you can't explain why I was excluded from every part of this family until money entered the conversation. Marilyn waved a hand dismissively. You're making this emotional. No, I said evenly. I'm making it accurate. Logan slammed his palm against the table. You always had to prove something. Always showing off how smart you were, how creative, how special. Howard placed a calming hand on Logan's shoulder. Your brother had more potential, he said, as if stating a fact. We had to nurture that. You were always so self-sufficient. Self-sufficient, the word echoed. I let it hang there, feeling something crystallize inside me. Not anger, not grief, but clarity. You missed my high school graduation, I said quietly. Marilyn frowned. That's not fair. You missed my college scholarship ceremony. Howard opened his mouth, closed it. You missed the launch of my company. You missed my wedding. I tapped the table lightly with each sentence, marking time. You missed my life. Hannah finally looked up, eyes shining. We didn't mean... But now, I continued, my voice steady, you want to share in what that life built. Howard pushed the loan paperwork closer, impatience creeping into his tone. We're asking for what's reasonable. Family helps family. Marilyn nodded. The interest rate is fair, as if this were a favor. Logan's mouth curved into something close to a smirk. Blood is thicker than water, Caro. I stood. The movement drew their attention immediately, chairs shifting, bodies leaning forward in anticipation. For a moment, they probably thought I was reaching for a checkbook. Instead, I reached for my briefcase. I placed it on the table with a soft, deliberate thud. I've already made a decision, I said. Logan's eyes locked onto my hands as I unlatched the case. Howard leaned forward. Marilyn's fingers twisted the napkin in her lap. I withdrew a single document and set it between us. This, I said, smoothing the paper with my fingertips, Is the announcement for the Aurora Media Scholarship Fund. They stared at it. $16 million, I continued, dedicated to creating opportunities for young women in digital media arts. Logan let out a strangled sound. 16 million? Named after Mrs. Rivera, I added. My high school media arts teacher, the woman who showed up when my family didn't. The room went very still. The funds are protected in a foundation trust, I said. The board approved the allocation last week. The press release goes out tomorrow morning. Marilyn's face drained of color. You can't be serious. I am. Logan shot to his feet. You're wasting it on strangers. I snapped the briefcase closed. I'm investing in girls who were overlooked. Girls who don't have to beg to be seen. Howard's voice trembled. We need that money. I met his gaze, unflinching. No, what you needed was to show up. I reached into my pocket and turned my phone screen toward them. A recording app glowed, timer running. I've documented everything from today, I said quietly. Every demand, every attempt at guilt, just in case anyone gets creative with legal claims. Logan's chair scraped back violently. You can't just walk away. I paused at the doorway, my hand resting on the knob. You're right, I said without turning back. I can't walk away from my life anymore. Then I opened the door and stepped outside. The Porsche waited where I'd left it, metallic gray catching the afternoon light. As I drove away, my hands were steady on the wheel. For the first time, I wasn't running from my family. I was choosing myself. And behind me, in that quiet, carefully curated house, the image they'd protected for decades was already beginning to crack. The door closed behind me with a soft click, not a slam, not a dramatic exit, just a sound that felt final. I stood on the front steps of my parents' house for a brief moment, the afternoon air cool against my skin. Inside, I could still hear raised voices, Logan pacing, Marilyn crying, Howard trying to regain control of a situation that had slipped through his fingers the second I placed that document on the table. I didn't wait to hear how it played out. Some stories don't need an ending scene. The Porsche came to life beneath me as I pulled out of the circular driveway, the engine's low hum steady, grounding. As the house shrank in my rearview mirror, something unexpected happened. My hand stopped shaking, not because I felt victorious, but because the fight was over. My phone buzzed as I merged onto the main road. Ethan, you okay? I pressed the call button. It's done, I said as soon as he answered. There was a pause on the other end. How bad was it? I let out a slow breath. Exactly what we expected. Worse in some ways, clearer in others. Logan had lost control the moment he realized the money wasn't coming. Howard had tried to negotiate, to reframe, to salvage authority that no longer worked. Marilyn had cried about family obligation, about reputation, about what people would think. Not once had any of them said, I'm sorry. I'm proud of you, Ethan said quietly. The words settled in my chest, warm and steady. As I drove, memories surfaced, not as sharp pains, but as confirmations. Birthdays where I'd smiled politely while watching Logan open gift after gift. Holidays spent alone while photos of family gatherings appeared online days later. Achievements acknowledged only when it was convenient. I hadn't imagined it. I had lived it. Back at home, I set my keys down and leaned against the kitchen counter, letting the silence wrap around me. Ethan was still on the line. They're going to react, he said gently. I know. They'll escalate. I know that too. What they didn't know, what they had never bothered to ask, was that I'd prepared for this moment long before the Porsche photo ever went live. The Aurora Media Scholarship Fund wasn't an impulsive decision. It hadn't been born out of anger or revenge. It had taken shape months earlier, during a late-night conversation with Naomi Keller when she'd asked me what I wanted my success to do. Money is leverage, she'd said, but purpose is insulation. So I'd built insulation. The foundation was legally separate, governed by an independent board, structured in a trust no one, not even me, could manipulate on a whim. Every safeguard was intentional. I had learned from watching my family what happened when money was treated like entitlement instead of responsibility. That evening, my phone buzzed again, and again, and again, missed calls from my parents. Voicemails stacking up without being listened to. Texts from Logan, the tone shifting rapidly, from outrage to bargaining to thinly veiled threats. "You can't do this to us. Think about the kids. You're tearing this family apart." I silenced the phone and set it face down. Ethan came up behind me, resting his chin on my shoulder. "You don't have to read any of that." "I know." What surprised me wasn't the intensity of their reaction, it was how little it hurt. The next morning, the press release went out exactly as scheduled. By noon, the story was everywhere. $16 million. A self-made founder. A scholarship for young women in digital media arts. The response was immediate. Emails from educators, messages from former classmates, notes from women who saw themselves reflected in the mission. And then, inevitably, the backlash. My mother left 6 voicemails between midnight and dawn. Her voice moved through familiar stages, pleading, bargaining, wounded disbelief, and finally anger. Howard tried calling my office directly. My assistant, following clear instructions, told him I was unavailable, permanently. By the second day, Logan had started contacting business associates, framing the situation as a family dispute. What he hadn't anticipated was that people would ask questions. Why hadn't they attended my wedding? Why hadn't they been involved in my company's growth? Why did this only become urgent after the foundation announcement? Questions have a way of dismantling carefully maintained narratives. That afternoon, Patricia Wells leaned back in her chair as I finished recounting the confrontation. "How do you feel?" she asked. I considered it. "Clear," I said. "For the first time." She nodded. "That's what happens when power shifts from approval to agency." That night, I slept deeply. No racing thoughts. No replaying conversations in my head, searching for better answers. I had already given them the only one that mattered. In the days that followed, my family tried everything. Emails invoking faith, messages framed as concern for my well-being, indirect pressure through distant relatives and old family friends. Every attempt sounded different. Every motive was the same. They weren't mourning the loss of connection. They were mourning the loss of control. One evening, as Ethan and I sat on the couch reviewing foundation materials, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Logan. "You think this makes you powerful? You're alone." I didn't reply, because the truth was simple. I had never been more surrounded. I looked at the documents spread across the table. Applications already coming in. Stories of young women whose talent had gone unnoticed, voices waiting for space. This wasn't an ending. It was a transfer of power. From a family that never showed up to a future built on intention, boundaries, and choice. And as the noise from my past grew louder, one thing became undeniable. I was no longer the invisible one. They were. The backlash didn't arrive all at once. It crept in, methodical and persistent, the way people apply pressure when they believe time will soften resistance. By the third morning after the foundation announcement, my phone had become a catalog of escalation. Missed calls stacked on top of one another. Emails flagged urgent. Voicemails I didn't open, but could already imagine. My mother's voice shifting from wounded to indignant. My father's measured tone sharpening into quiet authority. They weren't asking anymore. They were demanding. At first, they tried guilt. "Family needs to stick together. You're hurting innocent people. How can you live with yourself knowing the children are suffering?" When that didn't work, they pivoted. Religion, reputation, community. A voicemail from a pastor I hadn't spoken to in years appeared late one afternoon. He spoke gently about forgiveness, about reconciliation, about the importance of honoring one's parents. He suggested a meeting, prayer, healing. I deleted it without responding. Then came the intermediaries. A cousin I barely remembered texted me about misunderstandings on both sides. An old family friend sent an email urging me to be the bigger person. Someone forwarded a message from my mother framed as concern for my mental health. Each one carried the same implication. This was my responsibility to fix. At work, I stayed focused. The Aurora Media Scholarship Fund moved forward exactly as planned. The board met, the trust documents finalized, applications poured in faster than anticipated. The momentum was real, tangible, grounding. Still, my family found ways to reach through the noise. On the fourth day, Janine from reception called my office. "Kara," she said carefully, "your parents are here, with Logan. They're causing a scene." I stood at the window of my office, looking out over downtown Portland, glass towers catching the gray afternoon light. Below, traffic moved with purpose, oblivious to the small drama unfolding in my lobby. "What do you want me to do?" Janine asked. "Have security escort them out," I replied calmly. "Professionally." Through the glass walls, I watched as security approached. My mother's voice rose above the ambient hum, accusations sharp, theatrical. Logan stood beside her, arms crossed, face flushed with the familiar frustration he'd worn whenever he was denied something. My team glanced at me, searching for cues. "It's being handled," I said evenly. "Let's continue." As the elevator doors closed behind them, Logan's voice carried back one last time. "This isn't over. You have obligations." That evening, I drafted a single email. It was brief, precise, unemotional. I informed them that any further attempts to contact me at my workplace would result in a formal complaint. All future communication would go through my attorney, whose information I provided. I signed it simply, Kara. When I read it aloud to Patricia Wells 2 days later, she nodded. "Direct," she said. "Clear." "Necessary," I replied. "Not satisfying. Not cathartic. Necessary." The next escalation came through the media. Logan, apparently convinced that public pressure would succeed where private manipulation failed, contacted a local reporter about a family dispute involving sudden wealth. What he hadn't anticipated was curiosity. The reporter asked basic questions. Why hadn't my parents attended my wedding? Why hadn't they been involved in my company's growth? Why did this concern only arise after the foundation announcement? The resulting article painted a picture Logan hadn't intended. Parents absent during milestones, suddenly interested when money entered the frame. My mother took to social media, posting emotional messages about betrayal and family values. The response wasn't what she expected. Comments flooded in, from former classmates, business peers, even distant relatives. "We always wondered why they never talked about your success. Good for you for setting boundaries. You don't owe anyone your future." Support arrived quietly, steadily. Meanwhile, Logan's financial situation unraveled faster than I'd imagined. News of his missed mortgage payments surfaced through professional circles. The contrast between his instability and the foundation's transparency became impossible to ignore. At home, Ethan adjusted our routines. Security protocols tightened, invitations filtered through layers of assistants and advisors. "You okay?" he asked one night as we sat at the kitchen table, documents spread between us. I considered the question. "They're louder," I said, "but they're also clearer. Clearer in motive, clearer in pattern." "They're afraid," Ethan observed. "Yes," I agreed, "and that's not my problem." The following week, I sent one final message to all three of them. I reiterated the boundary. No direct contact, no intermediaries, no appearances. Any further harassment would be documented and addressed legally. There was no reply. For the first time, silence felt intentional on my terms. The tension didn't vanish. It shifted. From chaos to control, from reaction to response. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was protecting myself. And as the noise from my family grew increasingly desperate, one truth settled firmly into place. Boundaries weren't cruelty, they were consequence, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't bracing for what my family might do next. I was building something that didn't require their permission to exist. The quiet that followed felt different. Not empty, intentional. With my family's noise finally pushed to the edges of my life, the Aurora Media Scholarship Fund began to take up the space it was always meant to occupy. Meetings replaced arguments. Purpose replaced vigilance. The work moved forward not because I was proving anything, but because it mattered. The foundation's temporary office sat in a converted studio downtown, all tall windows and pale wood floors. On the walls hung storyboards, early concept sketches, and timelines mapped with colored markers. 12 women made up the board, leaders in media, finance, education, each chosen not for prestige but for judgment. They asked hard questions, they argued, they cared. When the first round of applications closed, the volume surprised all of us. Hundreds of submissions from young women across the country, filmmakers, animators, digital storytellers, voices that had been quietly building without anyone amplifying them. As we reviewed portfolios late into the evening, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about my family. The stories in front of me demanded presence. Talent layered with restraint. Ambition sharpened by necessity. The familiar ache of being unseen threaded through so many of the essays that it felt personal. One application stopped me cold. Maya Henderson, 17, filmmaker. Her submission video was raw and unpolished, shot in natural light that shifted imperfectly across the frame. She spoke carefully, like someone used to being interrupted. She talked about finding her voice through film when her family couldn't hear her. About stories she told herself in silence, waiting for someone to notice. I watched it twice. "She's strong," one board member said, "but quiet." I nodded. So was I. Maya was selected unanimously. The day she came to the office for orientation, she stood just inside the doorway, backpack clutched tightly, eyes taking in everything at once. She smiled when spoken to, but didn't initiate conversation. Not shyness, self-protection. We sat together after the group session ended, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the floor. "You don't have to impress anyone here," I told her gently. "You already belong." Her shoulders relaxed. Just a fraction. Mentorship wasn't something I'd planned to do personally. At first. But when Maya asked, hesitant, careful, if I would review her next project, the answer came without thought. "Yes," I said, every step of the way. The shift was subtle, but profound. Instead of replaying old conversations in my head, I spent evenings reviewing shot lists. Instead of bracing for incoming messages, I fielded questions about pacing, framing, and light. Instead of defending my boundaries, I watched someone else discover hers. One night, after a long session editing Maya's footage, she looked up at me, eyes shining with something close to disbelief. "You actually see what I'm trying to do," she said. The words landed deeper than she knew. I thought of Mrs. Rivera, my high school media arts teacher, how she'd sat in the back row of my first gallery showing, clapping like it mattered, how she'd told me simply, "Keep going, you're not wrong." That belief had carried me farther than my family ever did. Now, it was my turn. Healing didn't arrive as a dramatic revelation. It came quietly, through structure, consistency, and forward motion. Through watching Maya gain confidence. Through seeing the foundation's mission take shape independent of my past. Even my therapy sessions shifted. "I don't feel like I'm running anymore," I told Patricia Wells one afternoon. "I'm oriented," she smiled. "That's what purpose does. It gives pain somewhere to go." At home, Ethan noticed the difference before I did. "You're lighter," he said one evening as we cooked dinner together. "Not because things are perfect, because you're present." I was. The foundation announced its mentorship expansion weeks later. Applications doubled. Press coverage focused on impact, not controversy. The narrative had changed. and I hadn't had to fight for it. I didn't feel victorious. I felt aligned. As Maya's first short documentary took shape, we watched a rough cut together in the studio. The screen faded to black, the final frame lingering just long enough to breathe. She turned to me, voice unsteady. "You're the reason I believe I can do this." I shook my head gently. "No, you're the reason." But I understood what she meant. The cycle had shifted, not from revenge to forgiveness, but from harm to intention. I wasn't healing by looking backward, I was healing by building forward. And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something I had to defend. It felt like something I was allowed to claim. The message came 3 weeks later. Not a voicemail, not an ambush. An email. Short, careful. Written in my father's voice, though I suspected my mother had dictated parts of it. Could we meet? Somewhere neutral, just to talk. I read it once, then again. 3 months earlier, I might have rushed to say yes, desperate for acknowledgement. Now I sat with it. Let it settle. Let myself decide whether this was about closure or control. In the end, I agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown, the kind of place people went to be unnoticed. I arrived early, ordered tea, chose a table near the window. When my parents walked in, I barely recognized them. They looked smaller, no tailored confidence, no curated image. Just two people carrying the quiet weight of consequences they hadn't planned for. My father, Howard, sat across from me, hands wrapped around his untouched coffee. My mother, Marilyn, clasped her purse like an anchor. "We should have been there," he said finally. "At the wedding?" I asked. He swallowed. "Everywhere." The word hung between us. My mother's eyes filled, but she didn't cry. "We didn't realize how much we were losing." I nodded. "You didn't realize because you never looked." Silence followed, not defensive this time, but reflective. "How can we fix this?" she asked. 3 months ago, that question would have felt like oxygen. Now it felt like truth-seeking. "Some things can't be fixed," I said gently. "Only accepted." My father straightened slightly. "We're willing to try, to make amends." I studied their faces, the lines, the uncertainty, the absence of entitlement I'd grown used to. "I'm not closing the door forever," I said. "But I need accountability, not convenience." My mother nodded quickly. "Of course. I need you both to start therapy," I continued. "Individually, not with me. This isn't about reconciliation yet. It's about responsibility." My father frowned. "That seems unnecessary." "It's non-negotiable," I said calmly. There it was, the line. They exchanged a look, old habits flickering. For the first time, they understood that persuasion wouldn't work, that authority no longer applied. When we stood to leave, nothing had been resolved, but something had been acknowledged. As I walked back to my car, I felt no rush of relief, no cinematic breakthrough, just clarity. Closure, I realized, isn't about perfect endings. It's about clean boundaries. In the weeks that followed, I heard through others that Logan's house had gone into foreclosure. The twins would be transferring to public school. The life my parents had protected at all costs had finally collapsed under its own weight. I didn't celebrate, I kept building. The Aurora Media Scholarship Fund expanded its mentorship program. Maya's documentary was accepted into its first regional festival. I stood in the back row during the screening, watching her take questions with confidence she hadn't had months earlier. Afterward, she found me in the crowd and hugged me without hesitation. "You changed my life," she said. I shook my head. "You changed your trajectory. I just opened a door." At home, Ethan and I hosted dinner for our chosen family, mentors, colleagues, board members, friends. Laughter filled the room. No one needed to perform. No one needed to be impressive. I raised my glass. "To those who see us as we are." The toast echoed, warm and certain. Later that night, my phone buzzed. A text from a cousin asking why I couldn't just forgive and forget. Another message invoking family unity. I didn't reply. Some invitations arrived too late. A year after my wedding, the one with the empty front row, I stood at a podium accepting a Community Leadership Award. As the applause washed over me, I scanned the room. No phantom seats, no imagined absences. Every person there had chosen to be present. This journey didn't begin with success, I said into the microphone. It began with invisibility. And it led me here, not because I proved my worth, but because I stopped waiting for permission to exist. The standing ovation felt different than I'd imagined. Quieter. Deeper. Driving home that night, I passed the cafe where I once edited videos on a borrowed laptop. Through the window, I saw my parents walking past on the sidewalk. Our eyes met briefly. I didn't stop. There was no pain in that moment. Just acknowledgement. They taught me what love wasn't. Ethan, my work, and the people I chose taught me what it is. Family isn't who raises you, it's who lifts you. And if this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or quietly sidelined, take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and whether you believe family is defined by blood or by choice. Because sometimes the most powerful legacy isn't what we inherit, it's what we build on our own terms.